Hey folks, I just got out of the shower recently, so my hair's a little wet, but I wanted to create this video to bring up my thoughts on a very good video I saw from Omarisuf recently, and it brought up the hip thruster, and he brought on a guest named Brett Contreras to discuss the hip thruster, and specifically how it pertains to the world of athletics, and how it can be used as an assistance exercise to help benefit certain lifts that are involved with lifting-related sports, such as weightlifting and powerlifting. Now, before I go any further, I should just say that I do have a tremendous amount of respect for Brett Contreras. I think he is a top-tier exercise physiologist. I've read several of his articles on TNation and bodybuilding.com, and he's someone who I'd recommend if you want just good information about lifting and biomechanics in general. However, that being said, I do have a few points of contention with this video, since I think it brings up a few points which aren't outright fallacious, but are a little bit misleading as far as, like, what the hip thruster can actually do for you if your goal is some sort of lifting-related sport, or if you just have a sport where, you may have an off-season training program where lifting may be beneficial to you. So he brings up the first point, which I actually tend to agree with, which is that the hip thruster is a very good exercise for building a glute hypertrophy, which is true, because I mean, if your goal is just to build the muscle, then you just want to apply as much tension to the muscle as possible, and you can do that with any exercise that allows you to lift enough weight to stimulate that kind of muscular hypertrophy, and the hip thruster is no exception there. And I think that's why the hip thruster is a good exercise if you're a bodybuilder, because ultimately if you're a bodybuilder, the only movement you need to do in competition are poses, and you can learn those in a ballet class or a Pilates class for all I care. But as far as the actual lifting-related sports go, such as powerlifting and weightlifting, I do not see the hip thruster as an effective exercise, and here's the reason why. If you look at the actual positioning of the hips and the knees while you're doing the hip thruster, while you're performing the exercise, let's say you put the bar on your dick and everything, and you go ahead and extend your hips. Okay, that's great. You're getting the hip extensors involved, the gluteus maximus. That's wonderful, because that's a very important exercise for the lockout of the deadlift, which Brett Contreras brings up. However, there's a problem if you look at the knees. The knees are consistently flexed at a 90-degree angle, which means that the knee extensors cannot be involved in this exercise. You have this very big muscle in the quadricep complex called the vastus lateralis. Now, one of its roles is hip flexion, but another role is knee extension, I should say. So when you're doing the top part of a deadlift, you should still have your knees slightly flexed, unless you're doing the deadlift incorrectly, where you blow your knee extension at the beginning of the lift and you just put all the torque on your upper and lower back. So at the top part of the lift, not only are the glutes very important, but the knee extensors are very important as well, and it doesn't make sense to try to isolate a muscle in a movement where you have a series of kinetic chains that are all working in sync to produce a functional athletic movement. So if you see someone who's struggling with the deadlift, where they're like trying to lock out of the top right there, what's the point of trying to isolate a muscle when you can really just simply lower the weight and practice the movement until you get strong enough to overload and do it at a heavier weight where you don't have that lockout problem? What you typically see are people, they'll try to hitch the bar and everything like that, and a responsible strength coach, I don't think, would say, okay, well, that person needs to not do as many deadlifts. They should go ahead and do fewer deadlifts, and they should do some more hip thrusters as a solution, per se. And I think that's nonsense, because you got to think about the SAID principle: specific adaptations to impose demands. That means if you want to get good at something, you got to do that specific thing. And that's why somebody like Lance Armstrong could be a very good cyclist, because he has excellent cardiorespiratory health and just a very high VO2 max. Yet when he runs a marathon, he does a good time for an amateur, like 3 hours and 10 minutes or so, and that's because he's specifically trained for cycling. The same thing applies with any kind of lifting related sport. So the bulk of your program when you're a lifter should be on the movements you're actually going to be applying to your sport. So that means that if you're a weightlifter, you want to do the cleans, the jerks, high pulls, low pulls, as well as all the assistance exercises that help benefit that sport. And the same thing with powerlifting. You want to do those main movements as well as a few assistance exercises which help benefit that movement. However, those assistance exercises should involve all the joint angles and all the same kinetics of the actual movement itself. So that means that you shouldn't try to isolate the muscles. You should just try to apply those muscles in a way that will actually benefit the movement. So yeah, I think the hip thruster is pretty worthless, and I don't think you should waste your time with it. Just anecdotally speaking, I've used to do hip thrusters, and I think that the only physiological response I got was my hip thruster got stronger. stronger, but didn't really help benefit my squat at all. You're much better off using that energy on just doing more squats and deadlifts if you want to improve those movements. So yeah, those are just my 2 cents on the issue, and I hope you learned something. Take care.